Monroe, Louisiana, 1975. During a concert that was practically shaking the town, he does something he almost never does. He stops the show and gets angry. Not because of a technical problem, but because of two women in the audience who stole a scarf from a little girl who was crying. What happened next becomes one of the most talked about moments in Elvis concert history, revealing a king that most people have never seen. Elvis Presley had given that scarf to the little girl with his own hands just seconds before, a warm gesture he made at nearly every concert. But when two grown women snatched the scarf right out of the child's hands, something inside Elvis broke. The band fell silent. The crowd plunged into sudden silence. And Elvis made a move so unexpected, so personal, that those who were in that arena never forgot that moment even 50 years later. He reached up and removed the diamond and onyx cross from around his neck, that piece of jewelry worth thousands of dollars, and gave it to the little girl. The message in that moment was unmistakable. That child's tears mattered more than everything else in that arena. If you were at an Elvis concert in the 1970s, you know about the scarves. It had become his signature. During performances, Elvis would wipe his face with a white scarf, then toss it into the crowd or hand it directly to someone in the front row. Sometimes he'd give away 20-30 scarves in a single show. Women would scream, reach out, compete with each other just to grab one. Because this wasn't just a piece of cloth, this was a piece of Elvis. The scarf ritual began organically in the late 1960s. Elvis would sweat under the stage lights, wipe his face with a scarf, and without thinking, toss it to a woman in the front row. Her reaction was so emotionally charged. The tears, the screams, the way she clutched it, as if it were the most precious thing she'd ever held, that Elvis realized, without even trying, he had discovered something powerful. From that moment on, the scarves became an indispensable part of every show. The road crew would prepare dozens of scarves, plain white silk scarves, nothing flashy. Elvis would drape them around his neck, use them throughout the performance, and give them away. It was a way of connecting with the audience, a way of making his fans feel seen. In an arena where 10,000 people were screaming, receiving a scarf from Elvis meant you were no longer just part of the crowd. You were someone special. But with this ritual came chaos. Women would push and even fight each other to get a scarf. Elvis's security team had to stay alert. Sometimes things got rough. Usually Elvis would laugh it off, toss another scarf, keep the show going. But what happened on that particular night in Monroe, Louisiana, was impossible to laugh off. Because this time it wasn't about a scarf. It was about a little girl who had done nothing wrong, and a keepsake that two adults had decided mattered more than a child's happiness. When Elvis saw that little girl crying, he made a decision that stopped the entire concert. Monroe, Louisiana was not a big city. It wasn't New York or Los Angeles. It was a small southern town, the kind of place where an Elvis concert was the biggest event of the year, maybe the decade. The Civic Center Arena held around 8,000 people, and every seat was filled. Families had driven hours to get there. Some had been waiting years to see Elvis live. By 1975, Elvis was in the middle of what would turn out to be his final years of touring. He had gained weight, grown exhausted, become dependent on heavy medication. The jumpsuit he wore that night, white with gold embroidery, was tight and uncomfortable. His health was deteriorating, though most fans had no idea how serious things had become. Yet when Elvis stepped onto that stage, a transformation took place. The exhaustion was erased, the pain disappeared, and for 2 hours he was the king again. The Monroe audience was electric. Small-town crowds always were. They weren't jaded like Las Vegas audiences. They weren't critical like New York crowds. These were people who had saved up from part-time jobs to buy Elvis records, watched him on Ed Sullivan, grown up listening to his voice on the radio. For them, seeing Elvis live was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. About an hour into the show, Elvis was performing "Love Me Tender." It was one of the slower, more intimate moments in the set, emotional, sincere. Elvis often used this song to connect with the audience. He'd walk to the edge of the stage, reach out to hands, sometimes pull someone close for a kiss or a photo. That night, Elvis noticed a little girl in the front row. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8 years old, standing there with her parents. She wasn't screaming like the other fans. She was just looking at Elvis, eyes wide open, as if she couldn't quite believe he was real. Elvis smiled at her. He reached for one of the scarves around his neck. He was wearing 4 or 5 that night, and walked directly to the girl. He knelt down at the edge of the stage, held the scarf out and draped it over her small shoulders like a shawl. The little girl froze. She didn't scream. She didn't reach out. She just stood there, tears streaming down her cheeks, clutching the edges of the scarf, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. The crowd around her erupted. Applause, cheers. Her parents were crying. It was a perfect moment. The kind of moment Elvis created at nearly every concert, a small gesture that meant everything to one single person. Elvis stood up, winked at the little girl, and began walking back toward the center of the stage. The band was ready to continue with "Love Me Tender." Everything was exactly as it should have been. And then it happened. 2 women, both in their 30s, seated close to the little girl, reached out and pulled the scarf off her shoulders. Not gently, without asking. They simply grabbed it and pulled. The little girl stumbled backward in shock, and then she began to cry. Not with silent tears, but with the loud, heartbroken sobs of a child whose world had just been shattered. Elvis noticed the little girl. Through the noise of the crowd and the sound of the band, he heard that little girl crying. He turned, saw what had happened, and his entire demeanor changed. Those who were there, and there are several accounts documenting this moment, said they had never seen Elvis that angry. Not playful anger, not performed anger. Real, genuine anger that came from somewhere deep inside. Elvis walked to the microphone and raised his hand. A stop signal. The band cut off mid-note. The backup singers fell silent. The entire arena went quiet, sensing that something had gone wrong. Elvis pointed at the 2 women who had taken the scarf. "You two," he said into the microphone. His voice wasn't loud. He didn't shout. But there was steel in it. "That wasn't for you. That was for her." The 2 women were stunned. One of them tried to smile. Maybe this was part of the show. Maybe Elvis was joking. But he wasn't joking. "Give it back," Elvis said. "Right now." The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't part of the performance. This was real. Elvis Presley, the greatest entertainer in the world, was publicly calling out 2 members of his own audience for stealing from a child. One of the women, with visible embarrassment, tried to hand the scarf back to the little girl, but it was too late for that. The little girl was still crying, shaken, humiliated. She didn't want the scarf anymore. Elvis saw it. He saw that the moment had been ruined for her, and he made a decision no one was expecting. He reached up and removed the necklace from around his neck. This was no ordinary necklace. It was a diamond and onyx cross on a gold chain, a piece he wore regularly, personal and valuable. Those close to him later estimated it was worth several $1,000s, perhaps more. Elvis walked to the edge of the stage. He gestured for the little girl to come closer. Her father guided her forward. She was still crying, still trembling. Elvis knelt down again, brought himself to her eye level. "Look," he said softly, this time away from the microphone, just for her. "They can't take this from you. This is yours." And he fastened the cross around her neck. The diamonds caught the stage lights. The crowd was left breathless. People began to applaud. But this wasn't ordinary concert applause. It came from somewhere deeper, respectful, moved. Elvis stood up and signaled to his security team. "Get her back to her seat safely," he said. "Nobody bothers them." 2 security guards escorted the little girl and her family back through the crowd. Elvis watched until he was certain they were safe, and only then did he turn back to the microphone. "Let's try that again," Elvis said, and the band started "Love Me Tender" from the beginning. But this time, as Elvis sang, his voice was different, heavier, more emotional. He turned his gaze toward where the little girl was sitting several times, making sure she was all right. When the song ended, the standing ovation lasted 5 minutes. After the show was over, Elvis didn't let it go. According to accounts from security staff and band members, he was still visibly troubled backstage. "Why do people act like that?" he asked Charlie Hodge, his longtime friend and guitarist. "She was a child. Why couldn't they just let her have that moment?" Charlie didn't have an answer. Nobody did. It was simply human nature, the ugly face of fandom, where ego overtakes decency. But Elvis didn't let the story end there. He asked his security team to find the little girl's family before they left the arena. He wanted Graceland's contact information given to them. He wanted them to know that what happened was not his fault, not something he had wanted. The little girl's parents later spoke to local newspapers, declining to give their daughter's name for privacy reasons, and shared that Elvis had given them backstage passes and spent 10 minutes with their daughter after the show. He signed autographs, took photos, told her she was someone special, and gave her one more gift, a scarf with his signature written on it in marker. "Take good care of that cross," he told her, "and remember this. People who snatch things out of someone else's hands, you're worth more than them. You had earned it. Don't ever let anyone make you feel otherwise." What happened to that diamond and onyx cross? According to follow-up interviews conducted decades later, the little girl, now a grown woman, still has it. She never sold it, never put it up for auction, never tried to profit from it. It sits in a safe deposit box, along with photographs from that night and the signed scarf Elvis gave her backstage. In an interview she gave in 2003, she said, "People have offered me a lot of money for that cross, but it's not for sale. Because it's not about the diamonds or the value. It's about what Elvis did. He saw me. He stood up for me. While I was shaken and crying, he made me feel like I mattered." That's what the cross represents. Not a fortune, not a collector's item, but a moment when someone famous and powerful chose to protect a child who had no voice. For Elvis, this was not an isolated incident. Those who traveled with him, those who worked his concerts, those who saw him backstage, they all tell similar stories. Elvis giving away jewelry. Elvis stopping shows to call out bad behavior. Elvis making sure the vulnerable people in his audience were protected. Because through everything, the medication, the exhaustion, the chaos of fame, Elvis still believed that kindness mattered. Elvis noticed the little girl. Through the noise of the crowd and the sound of the band, he heard that little girl crying. He turned, saw what had happened, and his entire demeanor changed. Those who were there, and there are several accounts documenting this moment, said they had never seen Elvis that angry. Not playful anger, not performed anger. Real, genuine anger that came from somewhere deep inside. Elvis walked to the microphone and raised his hand. A stop signal. The band cut off mid-note. The backup singers fell silent. The entire arena went quiet, sensing that something had gone wrong. Elvis pointed at the two women who had taken the scarf. "You two," he said into the microphone. His voice wasn't loud. He didn't shout. But there was steel in it. "That wasn't for you. That was for her." The two women were stunned. One of them tried to smile. Maybe this was part of the show. Maybe Elvis was joking. But he wasn't joking. "Give it back," Elvis said. "Right now." The crowd began to murmur. This wasn't in the script. This wasn't part of the performance. This was real. Elvis Presley, the greatest entertainer in the world, was publicly calling out two members of his own audience for stealing from a child. One of the women, with visible embarrassment, tried to hand the scarf back to the little girl, but it was too late for that. The little girl was still crying, shaken, humiliated. She didn't want the scarf anymore.